Have you noticed that there's two main responses when you meet someone new and they hear that you're a vet? There's the, oh, how lovely, that must be amazing. Hey, can I ask you a question? My schnackazakazoodle's ears are always itchy. And then there's the, I don't know how you guys do it. You must see such horrible things. Can I ask you a question about my Blue Mill Frenchie camp? I don't know. Maybe I'm lucky, maybe I'm naive, but I don't perceive that I see a lot of horrible things. Gross things, yes, and sad things, but not often malicious stuff or horrible neglect. Except, every now and again, you do. Or almost worse than overt cases of cruelty or neglect are those cases that just give you the tingles, that icky feeling in the pit of your stomach that something's a bit off. In this conversation, our guest, Dr. Elizabeth Pearlman, guides us on how to get better at hearing those alarm bells and following the scent of suspicion to help you find the rot. Dr. Elizabeth Pearlman is a forensic veterinarian for the ASPCA's Veterinary Forensic Science Center in Gainesville, Florida. Liz grew up watching Animal Cops on Animal Planet, which sent her on a path to veterinary science and eventually a master's degree in veterinary forensic science. She's practiced as a private practice emergency vet and as a staff veterinarian for the Houston SPCA, and in 2018, she joined the ASPCA full-time as a forensic veterinarian. In her position, she assists law enforcement agencies nationwide with the identification, documentation, and collection of forensic evidence from crime scenes, live animals, and deceased animals. Additionally, she authors reports based on her findings and testifies in court as an expert witness. In this episode, she'll tell us why you are already a forensic vet and how to get better at it. She gives practical tips on what alarm bells to look and listen for to ensure that cruelty cases don't slip under the radar, as well as how to act on it bravely, because it's important. We round off the conversation with excellent advice on evidence collection, the ethics of reporting your suspicions, working with law enforcement, and even how to not fear the possibility of having to be an expert witness in court yourself. Oh, and you might listen to this and go, this is my thing. That's what I want to do, like CSI, forensic vetting stuff, for a job. Well, Elizabeth has us on that front as well with information and resources on how to build a career as a forensic vet. But first we start with a few stories. And be warned, we jump straight in with some content that you might not want your kids to hear, unless you want to answer some very weird questions. Please enjoy Dr. Elizabeth Pearlman. So I have to start with this question. I'm watching this murder mystery on TV. I forget the name, but it's a classic sort of whodunit, Sherlock Holmes, CSI type thing, which of course, now I'm prepping for my interview with you. And I immediately think, I wonder if that's what a job's like a little bit. And I'll start with cool cases. Have you had any bizarre or really puzzling or interesting cases in your job as a forensic vet that you can start us off with story time?
Sure. I feel like every case that I end up working on ends up being a cool case. So it's hard to pick one or two. Off the top of my head, we recently had a case where there was potential sexual abuse of a chicken, and it ended up being completely natural cause of death with no evidence of sexual abuse. Or there's the variety. Somebody's murdered this cat and there's a cat head or a cat body on my front lawn, and it ends up being a coyote did it based on DNA selection of the area that is left of the cat will swab for DNA analysis of saliva. We see everything that ranges from very serious and heinous crimes like animal sexual abuse or puppies that have been beaten multiple times with evidence of injury, to animals that have, for some reason or another, been starved, and then they completely rehabilitate and are adopted out into loving homes and we're able to follow them. So I have roughly 2 stories if you're interested, but that's kind of an overview of our work. We see such a spectrum of things that somebody is very gung-ho that it's a case and there's a suspect and we're going to get them, and that ends up being nothing. And we have other cases where it's a stray dog and the only thing they have is a microchip or no information to go off of. And we were like, I wonder if it'll go anywhere. And then it goes all the way to prosecution. So it kind of keeps us all on our toes, and it's fun to work through.
So it really is, because I had this, I hear forensic vet and I immediately think the cool stuff, the CSI stuff, right? But then I always go, oh, it's probably not as romantic and exciting as that. But it actually is. It really is that cool. Well, so as you said, some of the stuff's not cool at all, but interesting. Sorry, but you completely floored me with chicken sexual abuse.
Yes, I know.
Have you ever had a case of chicken sexual abuse? Or was it just the suspected case that turned out not to be?
There were a variety of circumstantial pieces of evidence that were reported to have resulted in this chicken, like feathers in underwear and a suspicious partner. And it's culturally appropriate for them to do it where the suspect is from. And now they're stateside, and the partner is concerned that this individual is sexually abusing their chickens. And so there was a lot of circumstantial stuff that is interesting, because if I were a veterinarian in general practice or a veterinarian without forensic experience, I would hear these things and be like, it's got to be sexual abuse. But then with our forensic training and guidance, there's literally methodical, no matter whether we suspect it to be sexual abuse. I don't think that until there's scientific evidence of it, right? Like, we are here to be the bridge between law enforcement or an investigating agency in the veterinary world. So if there's science that there is semen, then I want to know, is it animal semen or is it human semen? Because I can't tell you unless I know the difference, right? So there's additional testing that we can do. So I have had cases of sexual abuse with animals, but this one there was no evidence of sexual abuse. It was natural cause of death. So the case was not pursued by local law enforcement.
Wow. Okay, so tell me some cool cases. I'd love to know the actual real ones.
Sure. One of the most nearest and dearest to my heart, if you will, is a case about Abby. So Abby is a 16-week-old female intact pit bull type dog. And she presented to an emergency facility because her owner said she just profusely had blood coming out of her mouth. So he carries her in. She's got profuse blood coming out of her mouth, and she's minimally responsive. The emergency facility immediately started triaging, getting an IV catheter in her, getting some baseline blood work to be able to assess her, like what's going on with her, and also gathering history. And during that time, she ended up, like, as we all know on this podcast, things don't go as orderly as we expect them to. So while that's all going on, another person went to get history. And unfortunately, Abby coded and CPR was performed. And then in follow-up to that, the owner requested that CPR be discontinued. What was beautiful about this case is that the veterinarian assessing Abby in front of him saw that her signs and this like non-specific history of, I think he said, the owner said, I think I fell on Abby's head. The severity of her presenting with muffled heart sounds, obtunded mentation, her profuse amount of blood coming from her oral cavity and her nose didn't really match with the history. And so he did a beautiful job of knowing who to reach out to for his local law enforcement. And so Abby unfortunately did pass away after CPR was discontinued. And because Abby is considered evidence in that case, the local jurisdiction got a warrant to seize her body, which was then sent to our facility in Gainesville, Florida. So I work at it's a mouthful, but it's the ASPCA Veterinary Forensic Science Center. And we are the first freestanding veterinary forensic center dedicated to companion animals. So we accept anywhere in the nation of the US, bodies can be sent to us for free forensic necropsy. The only cost to the agency would be shipping cooler to send it to us, but we even pay for the shipping. So Abby came to us. I did external examination as well as full body x-rays, which is standard for our animals coming in for necropsy. And on x-ray, we saw she lit up with broken bones everywhere at different stages of healing. She had, fluid in the abdomen, fluid in the chest. And there was just this significant amount of injury throughout her body. So after I got x-rays, they then went forward with doing an internal examination through necropsy. And on that, I also found additional evidences of recent blunt force trauma that were not necessarily breaking bones, but different distributions and healing stages of bruising. And then I also found evidence of sexual abuse with her. So when I look at Abby, and the owner was convicted and has mandated to undergo mental health evaluation, a no animal order, and a fine, and a few other things that were also ordered by the court. But what really stands out to me about Abby is how this veterinarian had just an inkling. Something doesn't feel right with Abby's case. The history doesn't match up with the severity of the injuries that I'm looking at. And it really, really resonates with me because the work that I do as a forensic veterinarian, anybody can do. It's not necessarily that I hold a specific degree that then allows me to. This is a very, very accessible field, and just it can be as intense or as involved as you'd like it to be, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And so Abby really, I do feel that Abby got justice, and the amount of information that we learned from her case that I now incorporate to presentations that I, present for. It was a very, very sad case for obvious reasons, but in that there was a lot of benefit that came from, I don't want to say benefit, that's the wrong word. There was a lot of information that was learned through that experience of working with Abby.
Information, and then also the, as you said, the sense of justice, or at least saying, okay, well, that person is not going to own another pet, so at least we're going to spare some poor other unfortunate animal going through the same stuff. As you say, fantastic work for that emergency vet to follow up on his hunch, because we all have those scenarios where you go, this is weird, but it's easier to just ignore it and just go, oh, well, that's a mystery. The next consult is here.
And stateside, a lot of veterinary schools don't teach veterinary forensics. So there are states in the US that mandate veterinarians report, and yet the vet schools are not consistently teaching it. I feel that there's an obvious information gap that I'm just so impressed with this veterinarian's ability to have the forethought to document what he was seeing at the time of, as well as handling the emotional trauma of what he's seeing, the emotional trauma of what he's anticipating that it's from, and then also staying cool to document his findings, including his detailed history, was influential in the outcome. And the suspect did have a new puppy matching Abby's description when he was arrested.
It's interesting you mentioned and I would love to come back to it, but I will just underline, you said that vet basically having to deal with the emotional aspect of this, but I almost feel like responding and doing something about it is a cure for that emotional stuff, because in veterinary practice we do see those cases where you don't act and it can bother you forever, where you'll have this thing sticking in the back of your head going, I remember that case, that I feel a bit sick, and you never got to the bottom of it. So I think actually acting on it will help with those little micro traumas that we experience sometimes as vets.
Absolutely. And I have chills hearing you say that, because that is one of the biggest things that our agency really, really advocates is animal cruelty. I don't care what practice you're in, even ophthalmology, animal cruelty is happening and coming through the doors. I'm not going to say at a high rate, right? Depending on what your specialty is, or GP or ER, whatever it is, but it's happening. And the difference in that is whether a veterinarian can identify what's, the concerns in the pattern, either from the history provided or the animal's injuries and distribution of injuries or whatever it is, and really be prepared before that animal comes in, because that's one of the stressors that a lot of veterinarians struggle with is there's no protocol. So if you can imagine you're a first-year vet student and I put a cat in front of you and I say, okay, spay it. You haven't gone through anatomy. You haven't seen one be done unless you did previous work with it. Whereas who's doing anesthesia, right? There's so many other moving components. And that's essentially what's ending up happening most frequently with these animal cruelty cases, is that we're just throwing vets in without the prep work or the foundation. So we strongly advocate and encourage preparation for it. It also can lessen the stress. And I love your comment about micro healing for that situation. There's something that you are doing about it.
Hey, have I told you that a bunch of our clinical podcasts are now RACE approved? That means that you can now claim full CE points for listening to our subscriber stream, even in places that require RACE approval for point allocation. But the points are not the point. They're just a box to tick. The point is competence and confidence. The point is enjoying work more because you know what you're doing. Contact us at info@thevetvault.com to find out more about race points, or sign up at VVN, that's VVN for Vetvault Network.supercast.com. Have you got another story? I have so many questions, but you said you had 2 cool cases. Hit us with another case, because that case brought up so many things for me. So let's see what this one brings.
So another more of a feel-good story, because Abby is very heavy, and I appreciate and respect that. So there was a case We work very closely with agencies. So part of what our position is providing consultation, similar to what if you were to have a question about blood work, you might call internal medicine or something. And so we have a really good rapport with quite a few agencies. And there's an agency in South Florida that we routinely work with. And they had a dog that was essentially skin and bones, emaciated, 1 out of 9 on the Purina scale, pododermatitis with the feet ulcerating, and quite a few different medical conditions. And so we provided guidance for refeeding syndrome, talked them through what type of evidence collection to consider as far as like, does the dog have parasites? What standard photos would you recommend taking or should you take? As well as, legal documentation of the condition of the animal, treatments and diagnostics. And so with that, this dog had this beautiful recovery. I wish I could I'll send it to you after this. She's gorgeous. And she was actually highlighted for ASPCA, I believe, last year because of her beautiful transformation, the life that she now lives. But through this collaborative effort and this work, we were able to support this agency with financial support as well to be able to rehab her and get her from skin and bones, barely able to hold her head up. She literally couldn't even walk, into this robust pit bull that is sleeping on couches and getting belly rubs and getting uploaded videos. She has her own social media account of belly rubs and romping with her brother in the yard. And this just beautiful, beautiful, transformation of Khaleesi. Her name's Khaleesi. And then the other coolest part about this too is when we are working on suspected cruelty cases, we are specifically looking at one animal in a home, but there's the other components of the home life that can be going on. So there might be other animals and what are the condition of those animals. There might be children that are exposed to potential witnessing of crimes and the impact of that, or they may also be neglected if an animal's neglected. So there's something called the link that we talk about. So in this, when the investigators were working with Khaleesi's case, they uncovered that the owner also had 3 other dogs within the home that were also in poor condition. Not as severe as Khaleesi, but they still all 3 required immediate veterinary assistance. And so if Khaleesi, who initially presented as a stray dog who was lingering in the neighborhood, if it was just brushed off as a stray dog, this case could have gone nowhere. And so easily, I've worked in shelter medicine for a while, and it's so easy to be, oh, there's no owner, just keep moving. But the investigation on this team did a beautiful job of figuring out where she lived and then also further investigating the home to find these 3 other dogs that they saved.
So that was a case of neglect versus, I suppose, willful cruelty, even though neglect is still cruelty, but it's at least not like the other one that we discussed.
Yeah. We term that non-accidental injury for willful cruelty. So Abby was a perfect example of blunt force trauma. Repeated beatings and that kind of thing. And then Khaleesi needed medical care and veterinary care and sustenance and a clean living environment, and that wasn't provided. So both are equally as serious of things to consider for potential case involvement.
So just to give us a broader idea or a more complete picture of what you do in your job. So obviously there's investigation, and I like it. It's kind of like normal veterinary medicine, like medicine. You have symptoms or signs, and then you gather the evidence, and then you figure out what is responsible for this. It's just that in my life, I'm looking for a pathogen or for a toxin or something like that, whereas you look for malice, for people, for human-caused things. So it's the same sort of thinking processes. It's just a slightly extrapolated. And as you say, because we feel like I immediately go, well, I don't have the skills for this. But the way you describe it, you just have to expand your thinking a little bit broader.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do absolutely. We are involved with investigation and the component of investigating that animal as evidence. So Khaleesi, she's super, super skinny. Does she have a tumor? Does she have EPI? Does she have raging heartworms? Does she have intestinal parasites? Or even for Abby, she's a young dog. So a differential is going to be like some type of metabolic disease or congenital bone abnormality. Maybe she has rickets, right? And so being able to rule in or rule out possible differentials, which then assists law enforcement in getting more of a story. So when they go do their job to investigate, they have more of a complete story of this didn't just happen overnight. There's no underlying etiology to explain why Khaleesi is so emaciated.
Okay, so part of it, so Khaleesi ended up with you being investigated and treated as well. So basically, you're still doing standard vet work in addition to the other stuff that you do.
Yeah. And so what that looks like is we Also, a little plug, we have ASPCApro.org. And on there, under veterinary forensics, we have something that we call one pagers. And so these are quick reference guides that literally give the viewer key risk factors for caretakers, for history, for clinical exam findings for animal sexual abuse, one for non accidental injury, one for blunt force trauma, one for dog fighting, one for cockfighting. We've got a whole little library over there that I highly, highly recommend because I think it provides people with comfort to, okay, if I see 3 of these things on this list, I feel comfortable with moving forward and reporting. And here's how I respond to them. But you're absolutely right in documentation. Our documentation is the same thing that you guys would do with lab work, x-rays. I think the additional is the inclusion of physical exam findings. So we very rarely will put WNL within normal limits or unremarkable or normal. It's the same thing that y'all do. It's just going to be more specific. So these court cases can take 2-3 years, right? And so to be specific, I'll say musculoskeletal within normal limits. Instead of saying within normal limits, I'll say symmetrical, no lameness on gross examination, joints are smooth on palpation, ambulating ×4, right? And that's the same thing as within normal limits. And then, so in addition to a little bit more detail in the medical record, we also take standard photo series, which is also, we have our basic photo series for forensic examination on ASPCA Pro as well.
I think I just discovered the downside of your job. Even more paperwork. More detailed clinical records. No.
And I'll be transparent. When I started this job, I trajectoried from emergency. I knew I wanted to do veterinary forensics. I knew it. And so I went through externship up in New York. There's a partnership between NYPD and ASPCA. So all suspected cruelty cases, neglect or intentional injury or anything like that gets funneled through the ASPCA for forensic examination. And so through that, I was an extern and I just fell in love. I was like, I love shelter medicine. I love emergency. This is what I love. And so I worked emergency, I worked shelter med, and then I applied and was accepted here. And so it's been quite the journey, but I didn't anticipate the volume of time dedicated behind the laptop. I probably spend 70% of my time writing reports or doing presentations. And then the other 30% is being on scene, like crime scene processing, physical forensic exams, necropsy, those kind of things. But it's definitely not boring.
No, not at all. It doesn't sound like it. See, I'm oblivious to this. And I don't know if it's an Australian thing that we don't have the same systems. In fact, if anybody's listening to this and can tell me, yep, you have the same in Australia, because I don't feel like we have such a well-developed system. We certainly have the ASPCA and that, but I don't know that we have that forensic arm that you have. Maybe we do. I'd love to know. But so it's obviously a thing in the US. Like you could choose to become a forensic vet in America, to say that I can pick that as a career path, yeah?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because we actually, so part of our center down here in Gainesville, Florida is a teaching center. And so we actually had an Australian veterinarian from the RSPCA all the way cross-eyed to our facility. And she spent time with us and she was awesome. And then she went on and did more shelter medicine things while she was stateside. So I don't think we are the key focus of why she was here, but it was so cool to host her and hear about the Australian system and what they're doing over there, what you all are doing.
And so what are we doing? I'm oblivious.
I think it's a work in progress. She left with a lot of good ideas and support, and I think we're due for an update. I'll ping her shortly after this.
And then, of course, look, we have 64 countries who listen, so it goes much wider. But one of our other big audiences will be the UK, and I'd imagine they'd have similar systems in place. But let's make it focused on the stuff that you specifically know, and for our American listeners. How much work is there? Like if I decide I want to be a forensic vet, do you have the only forensic vet position in the country? So the job's full to come back in 20 years when Liz is retired? Or are there multiple jobs available within the field?
So it's great that you asked that, because I think we talked briefly about the spectrum of involvement with forensics. And I think that there's also a spectrum of involvement for employment. So I am one individual on a team of 8 employed by the ASPCA as we solely do veterinary forensic medicine. And there's quite a few people stateside who do have their own LLCs and they work contract-wise, and they have programs like that. A few universities are now having veterinary forensic pathology rotations and incorporating it into their curriculum and their positions. What I would say is most common is shelter medicine vets are going to see the cruelty case. They come in And it's just assumed that you're a shelter vet. So you're going to do high volume spay neuter, population health, and then you're also going to deal with these animal cruelty investigations. So I'd say that's the most. But there are also areas where there is no forensic veterinarian or veterinarian in general that they routinely work with, animal control or law enforcement. And so that's where I would strongly encourage any of your listeners, if they're interested, don't hesitate to reach out and reach across the aisle to those animal control or law enforcement agencies, because they probably don't even know that you're a resource. And so if you're interested in building a rapport with them to have that collaboration of, I understand what I'm doing, I would love to fine tune this with you, it can become a really, really beautiful program that can have enormous ripple effect.
It's actually a good opportunity if you are in an area or a country where there's not a system like this in place. You can actually make yourself an extra job by putting your hand up, basically, and saying, I want to do this, I want to get better at this, and contacting your local, whatever, ASPCA, and say, pay me, give me a call if there's a case, and I will work it up for you. How do you get better at this, Liz? Did you study further? You said somebody went to you guys in Gainesville to learn more. Like, are there specific courses that you can do, or is it a specialist level or special interest, or how does it work?
So there is no specialty. This is really an open field for those that are interested. Really, it's a strong area of interest as opposed to a specialty. And so some resources that I would look for or be curious about would be the International Veterinary Forensic Symposium, so IVFSA. It's an international organization that has yearly conferences with CE available through veterinarians and brings together stakeholders from Taiwan, from Puerto Rico, like international, to let's all gather and share what updated information we have or interesting cases we've had, which is a really, really great opportunity. There's also Florida International University, which is partnered with the ASPCA for an online master's program. There is a master's program through the University of Florida, which I've also completed. And then there are quite a few. And if any of your listeners are interested as well, the ASPCA provides free veterinary forensic training as well remotely. So we could always figure out a Zoom time if you've got your local Veterinary Medical Association chapter and you've got 20 people that are curious, we'll make that happen.
Okay. And then there's those resources that you said before, which sounds super useful. And I don't think, and I'm sure you guys work under a certain legal system and rules and regulations around cruelty and neglect, but it sounds like that will be universal. Whatever the local laws are, we're talking about the veterinary side of it. If you suspect this, go to those resources and there's your basic guide.
Yeah. I'd be curious to look more into and hear more from the legal teams in your area specifically. But if we're seeing multiple red flags or indices of suspicion, and so if I see a dog that has bilateral rib fractures, scleral hemorrhage, hemoabdomen, those are they raise my indices of suspicion quite highly. And so if I'm puzzle piecing all that together, whether an animal is abused here versus over in Australia, I think identifying it and putting a label on it as non-accidental injury on that animal would apply no matter where you are. Now, if that falls under, like here we have felony versus misdemeanor grading of that charge, that's up to the judicial law system that you guys have. That's not up to us as veterinarians.
I think a big stumbling block, and it's exactly what you said before, working, and as soon as you say hemoabdomen and those sort of markers, the red flags, see, you're oblivious if you don't think about it. Because you do have cases where you go, oh, that's weird. I can't quite, you get a hemoabdomen and it has rat bait on board, or it's got a splenic. Those are easy. And every now and again you get a case where you go, that's really odd. I don't get that. How, it hasn't been run over by a car. There's no history. Why is this?
Absolutely. And there's even publications, and it's not well known, right? Unless you're looking in our field, it's not commonly taught in veterinary schools. But there are literally publications that distribute and assess motor vehicle accident versus non-accidental injury of an animal. So the distribution of what we're looking at is completely different. But if we don't know, then how are we ever going to question it? And it's definitely a learning curve right there. Yeah.
And I think the stumbling block, even when you are suspicious, so there's the one thing that's flicked for me right now in this conversation is when it doesn't fit, don't just let it go as, oh, well, that's weird, let's move on. Think about it. Could this be something suspicious? Basically, be a little bit suspicious, because I tend to believe the best in people and believe the stories they tell you. But sometimes you have to think about it. And the next step then is, and I think that's where it gets hard and why we often will not do anything about it, is I don't know what's my first step. If I'm suspicious, who do I call? What's my first port of call? So let's make this practical. First of all, in the US, what would be my first port of call if I have a suspicion? Who did that vet call? Was it you guys, or where do you go?
So they would call, the National Link Coalition has an interactive website that it says, where can I report? So it's insane, but they've collected and compiled all US counties because it varies. Some people call sheriff's office or the police department, other people call animal control, other people call, right? There's no organization necessarily to it. There's not a standard blanket of how do we report. And so the National Link Coalition has compiled a list. No matter where you are in the US, if you go to their website and you go to the county that you're in, it will provide you exactly who to contact. And that is one of the barriers for reporting, because where else would we know that information from?
So will you send me links and stuff, links and phone numbers that I can put in show notes?
Absolutely.
And if anybody in Australia or the UK or anywhere else is listening to this and going, oh, I know the answer to that question, please shoot me an email and I will put it in the show notes as well. We can actually create a resource list somewhere, because that's often, I don't have, on a busy emergency shift, I don't have an hour to sit and Google who the hell do I phone to follow up on this.
And I'll ask around too on my end. I'll ask around. I'll ask my ASPCA vet friend.
Okay, fantastic. So that's one stumbling block. The other thing is the whole client confidentiality thing versus a duty of care. Because there's a part of it I go, yeah, you don't want to get people in trouble or put them, be suspicious of somebody and then it turns out that it was completely innocent and then I feel embarrassed because I accused you of something that, but I think I can answer my own question or reservations there by saying, when I made my promises the day I took my degree, that was something I promised that I would do. It is, I'll take care of animal health. So, if you step on a few toes occasionally, how do you feel about that? I suspect how you feel about it, but how do you get around that mental thing about privacy and all those sort of things?
So it's a little bit different here stateside because some states mandate it. So I love those states because it's literally the equivalent of, if you go back 40 years or so, mandated reporting of child abuse. It's facing the very same trajectory, or I don't want to say the trajectory, but the same battles against reporting mandated child abuse, which is now standard, is what the veterinary field is facing. And the rebuttal to that is it's their property. They can do what they want, at least to your state side, but you still cannot beat your property, and so laws still apply, even if that comes up. I think that the hardest part about this is that there's no line in the sand, right? There's no clear, it's a gray area. And so when we're in mandated states, it's very easy to be like, I am legally mandated to report this. But for people that are in non-mandated states, they may be facing the exact same questions. And I really think having the backing of knowledge with our one-pagers can be helpful. You are always welcome to reach out to have a discussion, like reach out to somebody in the field who is doing the work. Our team is available for that as well. And I think having that support network of figuring out where you fall on the spectrum. Some of these things, what I would report, you might think is client education, and that's not wrong. This really comes down to kind of your moral ethics and your moral compass, I'll say, more than ethics, and where you fall with that. So that's kind of my answer. I wish I could give you like, always report this. But there's a lot that goes into it. And there's a lot of consideration. Staff safety. Is it safe to do that? Do you, can you anonymously report? But as long, at least on our side of the ocean, as long as you're reporting in good faith, there should be no challenges to that. As of right now, there is no state that will not allow veterinarians to report. The only thing for us to think about is civil liability for somebody to sue for defamation.
So that is if I say, I think you beat your dog and then it turns out I'm wrong, and then they counter sue to say, well, people heard about this case and now people think I'm an animal abuser and I wasn't. Is that a consideration?
That could be. And again, I find the most strength in what I do from having a arsenal of publications behind me. So when I report something, not that I report, when I am testifying for something, I find that I'm very calm about it because I'm testifying to science, which is my background, which is my training. I'm able to weed out this or that. And so we might have a difference of opinion, but I'm not going to be like, you had a broken dog toenail and you let this dog suffer for a week, and so I'm going to report it, right? There's like obvious inflection of what we know and what we're understanding.
When you do report, and I don't know if there is a definite answer to this, but let's take it back to the Abby case and that emergency vet. Do you tell the owner that, look, I'm suspicious of abuse here, I'm going to report this just to make you aware? Or do you just do it, as you say, either anonymously or just call the authorities and they deal with it? Like, what's the recommendation?
That's a really good question. I should ask Abby's veterinarian. I've never asked him that, but that's a really good question. The diversity of what we work with veterinarians for is some don't feel comfortable, so they'll report it after the owner has left the building or as the owner is checking out or something like that. I've had other veterinarians, usually in mandated states, who tell me that they say, legally, I'm obligated because of my license to report this because I'm concerned about Abby and the safety of her home or whatever it is, right? And then also a little bit of a sidebar, concerned about safety, right? Because you need to maintain your staff safety. So if somebody is irate in your vet clinic and they're that irate in front of you and you suspect that they beat the snot out of their dog or their cat, you're probably not going to want to be like, so sit down with me, Charlie. Let's talk about this. How do you feel?
Let's talk about your violent tendencies at 2 a.m. when we're alone in the hospital. I would probably, I think the coward in me, because it's a high conflict situation, I'd probably want to say, do it not when they're in the building with you. And
that also gives you time. Like if I were to report something, that would give me time to digest what and how I want to say it, or, versus this knee-jerk reaction, they're waiting in the room and you're trying to hurry, or, and again, if you have that, if the veterinarian has that relationship because they've reached out proactively with that animal control officer or law enforcement officer, then there should also be more of a communication open line there that they're trusting what you're saying versus you trying to like convince, quote unquote, them that what you're saying is serious.
So you started saying a couple of things. What I want to get to is guidance for GP vets in practice or emergency vets or whoever, when you have either just a suspicion and you need to report it in a way that's going to work as evidence, or when somebody comes in and asks and says, look, like your chicken scenario, or there's my animal that has these wounds, I'm worried that this and this happened, or even I think the neighbor's dog attacked my dog. Basically, how do we get good enough to make something useful as evidence to record? What do we look for? How do we report it? Any tips that can help us in that regard?
Yeah. So even with cases that may not go anywhere. So say you're looking at a kitten and it's got something suspicious, but it's not enough for you to feel gung-ho or all in about reporting. If you take the extra 3-4 minutes to make a very thorough documentation of the animal's history, what your physical exam findings are, those kind of things. And then the next time this cat comes in, maybe it has new injuries or different injuries. It can also help to show a pattern of injury to an animal. So it can feel overwhelming. Like at certain clinics here, there's literally 15-minute slots for the vet to visit. And that includes assessment, high, by, drawing blood, everything, right? And so I understand that it can be very hard. I'm not necessarily suggesting this for every single client that comes in the door. But for the ones where you get an uneasy feeling or that hesitation that I heard from you in the beginning of like, ooh, how do I handle this, right? Maybe take a few extra seconds or minutes to be able to document, the physical exam findings. What is normal and what is abnormal? If you're concerned about blunt force trauma, I'd look at ALT and CK. Those are very specific for a liver injury and muscle injury, which are very commonly associated with blunt force trauma. Looking at those x-rays. So Fluffy was just hit by a car, but you don't think that. Would you be comfortable with chest x-rays? We need to make sure, there could be some lung bruising and they can decompensate quickly. Are you okay if we snap x-rays of the chest? And maybe there you see that there's rib fractures and you're like, okay, now we're ready to go bilaterally. There's rib fractures, we should report this. So really whatever, like what for you would make you feel comfortable with reporting or moving forward with a case?
You mean if I have suspicion of cruelty
because it's hard to come up with advice because there's so many different reasons to not want to get involved.
Yeah, I think it would just be unexplained trauma. It's, to be honest with you, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I've never really thought about it. And if I think back to the 25 years of my career, there would have definitely been cases that would have been at least worth exploring. I'm lucky of where I've worked, and I've not seen a lot. Like I can't, people say, oh, you must see some terrible things. And I go, no, not really. I think people are generally great because they bring in their sick animals and pay me to make them better. So not a heap, but I think it would be unexplained trauma. Okay, why have we got a broken bone? You told me that it just jumped off the, obviously that's going to happen, but it just jumped off the bed and now it's got a smashed femur. Doesn't make any sense.
There you go. Those are like the classics. Is he fell down the stairs. It's literally copy paste of child abuse. He fell off the bunk bed. He fell off the bed. He fell down the stairs. A bookcase fell on him. A door fell on him. There's so many, like things when you stop and think, you're like, that doesn't even make sense for the degree of injury that we're looking at.
Yeah. Great. And then I will just underline again the stuff you said earlier with the clinical record keeping, the stuff that we whinge about. But it's interesting that you say don't just try it with no lesions or within normal limits. Describe it. Be very thorough with this history to say, well, the eyes are normal. I can't see this. So I think that's a useful thing to remember when we describe these cases, because often, probably the most common cases that I face where you need to provide evidence would be often dog attacks. A dog on dog, and somebody's going to take the person that they found at the person whose dog attacks their dog at the beach. They need evidence, and so we'll do that. And even just that's useful to be very, very specific with what you find and what you describe. Do you have to go to court often and go sit in court? And is that as scary as it sounds? Because that scares the crap out of me, and I think most people. Like, it's sort of I do not want to be dragged into a court case to provide evidence because A, I don't feel qualified. I'm scared I'm going to A, say the wrong thing and mess it up, or B, get myself into trouble for providing incorrect information. And then, is it bad?
In our short dialogue, you have come across as very poised and educated, and you know what you're talking about. And you strike me as being transparent if there's anything that you misspoke on. And it is the exact same thing as when you're in court. So how I like previously mentioned that I'm speaking about scientific fact. So I go in knowing that scientifically this is where I stand based on blood work, based on x-rays, based on publications. And another veterinarian might have a different opinion, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm wrong, right? It's just a different opinion. That's never happened, but it can happen. And so similarly, something else that kind of calms my nerves is we talk to the judge and the jury the same way that I anticipate you would talk to your clients. So it's literally there as an educational component, right? And so it's not really that scary, because the same way I would describe emaciation would be if a client came to me and said, what's going on with my dog, right? And that's literally our purpose in court, is to educate. And I've been on the stand and made stupid comments before. I once said on my very first court appearance with the ASPCA, my friend got me a plaque that says, this is how embarrassing it was, is they asked about a dog being emaciated and if that could have happened overnight. And I said, dogs don't, I was like talking out loud and I shouldn't have been, like, I learned a lot since then. Okay. That was 6 years ago. I was like, dogs don't get liposuction, because there's no logical reason that a dog would lose like adequate body condition to emaciated the next day. And so there's definitely mistakes that are made, and we learn genuinely.
Well, that's not a mistake. That's a fact. It was maybe a bit sarcastic when
I was just thinking, I was probably like, is there anything else so they don't get liposuction? I was just I wasn't being Liz. So mistakes do happen in the stand, and that's okay. I've misstated something before when a dog had this and it's this, and I've said, excuse me, it's been after a break, and I'll say, excuse me, I misspoke. May I clarify this statement? And that's okay too. So it's not really as scary as what it feels like. And again, preparation really, really helps. So meeting with your prosecutor, whoever's pursuing that case, and going through the case with them can really, really be beneficial.
Then you mentioned at the beginning, and we touched on it, but the emotional component of this work. So now I'm back to somebody who's listening to this who goes, actually, I want to go all in on this. This sounds amazing. I want this as a job. But then you literally get thrown all the worst of the worst cases. How do you, who's Liz, not how does one, how do you protect yourself from it becoming traumatizing or probably at worst, at best, making you really cynical about human beings?
That's fair. That's a very good question. And going on that, we've had veterinarians that think they want to apply for a position. They come down for a week and they're like, ooh, this is not it. And I respect that more than anything. This line of work is not for everyone, just like I could never be a cardiologist. It's just not in the cards for me. And so I think appreciating and respecting bodily boundaries of when you're maxed out, when you need a break is very important. Our team is really good about mental health support and just supporting each other and taking breaks when we need them. I cannot stand when my mom sends me videos and she's like, somebody's beating an elephant, do something. Oh my God, your team needs to go now. And I'm like, Mom, she knows now, but what country is it in? Because it might be legal. How long ago was this video? So I absolutely, part of my mental health is I do not engage with animal cruelty that I'm not involved in, because I'm doing something about it that provides some type of relief to me. I'm working on it to make something come from it, or not. I've also had cases that we work on that don't go anywhere either. But I think the biggest thing too is just that balance of mental health days. So if I need a day off after a particularly challenging case, like Abby's case was a great example. I definitely took a day or two off to just go wander in the woods with my dogs, work them, train them, because that's my outlet, gym time, going to the gym and stuff. So really, and I'm not the best at it, but my team is really, really good about reminding me like, hey, like my boss as well. We just came back from a long case and she's like, why don't you take tomorrow off? I'm like, it's a good idea. Let's do that. So collectively, having that support system, I think, is really beneficial in addition to these internal monitors that I have.
Love that so much. I love that first thing that you said with the stuff your mom sends you, that you actively disengage when you're engaged, when you're doing it, and then you actively disengage, understanding that I can't save everything. I can't save everyone. I can't save everything. I can do what I can do. And this goes back to normal vet science stuff as well.
Yes.
You have finite time and resources. That is time, money, and emotional resources. So kind of giving yourself permission to let go of the stuff that's not under your direct influence, because otherwise it gets overwhelming. It can feel like, well,
Absolutely.
The world's gone to shit. I can't fix it. And then you burn out and you can't do anymore.
Well, and I'm sure some of your listeners feel the same with me. When there are things that I can't do, it hurts me. Like it genuinely, I get this feeling in my chest where I'm like, oh, that shouldn't be happening, or this should be happening, or, we collectively as a veterinarian can't save everything and we can't be everywhere at once. And I think that is a very good point.
I'd read a line, which book was it? It's a book on Stoicism. And basically the book is summarized with this one line that I try to use as a bit of a life motto, but specifically a work motto. And he said, I think it's Ryan Holiday, do what you can with what you have where you are. And that is all that you can do. And then the second thing you mentioned is just that culture of support, of being vulnerable enough to say, that was hard. I'm sorry. I think I need a break. But then your boss actually preempting that before you get to that breaking point, saying, I think that was harder than you realize. I think you need a day off, or some acknowledgement of that was tough. And I think that's often missing in practice, because you'll have a shift where you just get slammed, and 3 euthanasias and this. Individually, they're not going to break the camel's back, but cumulatively, somebody else talked about the little multiple holes you poke in the bucket, and before you know it, the bucket is empty. And having a team around you that can say, well, yeah, I think your bucket's leaking. Go home and hatch the bucket.
Absolutely.
Oh, man. One of my questions that I said to you was, why do this work? But I think we've answered that. Just in describing what you do, it's a very clear why. It sounds like such a fulfilling job because you do important work. But back to the question I asked about the cynicism. Does it just fall under? You don't seem like a miserable, cynical person. Do you get some cynicism? Do you become hard on the world because the world is hard on the animals that come to your door?
I'll tell you, there was one case that sat with me, that a girlfriend was dating a guy for a year and they decided to move in together. And then she had a cat. She went to work and then she came home and the cat is missing. And her boyfriend went with her all throughout the town, posting lost cat signs all throughout Facebook, all this stuff. And then a girlfriend of hers said, "Did you check the shed?" And as soon as she said that, the suspect's girlfriend, who he had just moved in with, her stomach dropped and she grabbed him by the ear, dragged him out to the shed because only he had a key to the shed. And so he opens the shed and her cat is beaten and sitting right there. And so how this all came about was a neighbor called because they were fighting in the front yard. She was beating the snot out of him. And so they arrived for domestic violence because she was beating him. And then they separated them and figured out what was going on. And now there's a case associated with it. And so that case really sat with me in the respect of being cognizant of who I let into my life. That's an example of like, you think, so she dated him for a whole year. She was with him for a whole year. So there are definitely cases that come in, and I'm cognizant that not every partner out there is going to murder my dogs, but that is something that there is a component that kind of tweaks the personality just subtly to keep that in mind. But I also routinely go to therapy that helps keep me grounded. I think that if we lose some of the humor in what our team does, also keeps us grounded and bonds us in that dark humor. Like, I'm sure your listeners are like, oh yeah. When it's tough, that's when the jokes come out, And so I think that's to some degree a normal coping mechanism, as long as it's not too dark.
Yeah. All right. So it's a cognizance of the dark side of human nature is that I think we all know it. Maybe it's good to occasionally be reminded that it does exist. But I love that it hasn't affected you in horrible ways, that you can still smile when you go to work. Liz, is there anything else around your job that I haven't asked or about this field? Anything else that you'd like to get out to the world about it before we move to our more personal questions, the wrap-up questions? Have I covered it?
If you're absolutely at all interested in veterinary forensics, anybody can do it. Like, any veterinarian can do it. And there's so many different ways that you can get involved. And there's so much variation in the involvement that you can be, whether you're all in and want to start your own LLC or your own proposition to a shelter or something like that, versus a general practice who just has a working relationship with a local law enforcement or investigating agency. And it's the same thing that you're doing in the day-to-day. I think the difference is just the thoroughness, the documentation, and rolling out kind of thing. And so that's all I've got.
Yeah, I feel like we all kind of do it already. We might either just not be aware that we're doing it, or we're really bad at it. And we can get a bit better at it. I think just switching on and realizing, hey, this is actually what I'm doing right now with this case. I'm being a forensic vet. Let me think about what Liz said and apply those things.
Yeah. And there's also great publications. So there's a new publication, I think 2022, from Dr. Rachel Turu. It's the minimum clinical standards for a forensic examination. And I'll send that to you as well. And it literally talks you through step by step. It's the first publication for a standard for how to do a forensic exam and how to write a report. So that could be a very, very nice back pocket thing, tutorial, step by step. Here's what you do.
I think my personal takeaway for clinical work is be aware of it and then create a protocol. Because exactly as you say, it's that, well, I don't know what to do next, so I can't be bothered. I have a system. Go, oh, I can't remember. What did we say at the meeting when I suspect a case? What should I do? Who do I call? Where do I take it? And actually having that documented somewhere saying, hit the abuse protocol and then run with it.
Absolutely. And it might be scary in the beginning, just like your spays were, but now you have a spay protocol and you don't even have to refer to it. So the same thing. First one might be scary, but you'll get the hang of it.
You can't get away without answering the standard questions, the routine questions. We'll start with podcasts. Are you a podcast listener?
I am.
Yeah? What are you listening to at the moment?
We travel a lot for work, so I'm always playing, like I have 3. It's really, This American Life is just beautiful. I just download and go. It's just storytelling. I can zone out and think about happy things. The Month Radio is also really, really cool. It's a story slam, so similar to This American Life, a little bit shorter usually though. And then I recently came on to Reveal because they mentioned something in Moth Radio, one of the other podcasts I listened to. I love serial investigations. So Serial is another great podcast, so I guess it's investigative journalism. Kind
of gels with how your brain works, I suspect.
See, I didn't even think about that. I should pay you instead of my therapist.
We could do a monthly podcast session. The pass along question, where I ask a previous guest for a question for my next guest, not knowing who they're going to be. So the guest in question was very much involved in climate change and net zero practices. So it's a very biased question. So I don't know that you will have an answer. But he asked, what can you do in your sphere of influence, particularly in your workplace, to encourage and support management to develop and enhance their sustainability and emissions reduction ambitions? That's a mouthful. Thank you, Jeremy.
Well, Jeremy, instead of driving my Hummer, I now drive my truck. No, just kidding. I drive a Honda Civic. So I think the biggest opportunity here is to just share COVID really changed things for our organization to see another way that the operation can run. So if like before, I would travel to veterinary schools and provide lectures for veterinary schools or for presentations, whereas I don't need to be there in person. It's great to be there in person, but every single one, how much are we flying and the expense and the emissions that are from travel just for one lecture that's an hour long versus being able to do it over Zoom and figure out a way to make that work. And that brings together, we have a national organization. So we've got people in New York, LA, Miami. And rather than flying them all into one central place for a meeting, we can do that over Zoom now. So I really, really think COVID encouraged us to have an opportunity to see our organization in a different light, in a way to see that we can cut down on travel with emissions with Zoom access or video conferencing, which I don't think that would have, maybe eventually it would happen, but I think COVID really, really kicked a lot of people in that direction unintentionally.
Cool. Good answer. Question for my next guest, please.
Okay. If you, as an adult, were talking to the 8-year-old you, what would you say?
8-year-old. I've heard that question answered for like 20-year-old. The 8-year-old's really interesting.
Yeah. When you're just getting started. Self-identity, playtime. What would your answer be?
No, I'll have to mull it over. I don't have a quick off the mark. I'm trying to just remember 8-year-old me. Where was I? What was I doing? What would my answer be? Probably don't limit yourself by what you think your natural abilities or lack of ability. Hard work will get you places where you think I might not be good at this thing, but you could, if you really wanted to, you probably can get good at it. That's what I'm learning in the last 10 years.
I love that. That's so cool.
Right. And then our last question, Liz, you have the opportunity to speak to all of the vet new grads of 2024, and you have a couple of minutes to give them one little bit of advice. It can be career advice or personal. What do you say to them?
I think coming out of vet school, at least I'll speak from my personal experience, I really struggled academically. I was never a really good test taker, and I'm much more of a hands-on learner. So with the density of books and curriculum in vet school, I had a hard time. And so with that in mind, I would encourage, little me would be so proud of where I am now, because I never in my wildest dreams would imagine that I am doing the job that I dreamt about as a child watching Animal Cops on Animal Planet, right? That's the end. So I would strongly encourage that your academics don't define who you are. Nobody has ever said, what did you score in histology? Did you get an A or a C, right? Nobody cares. It's important that you take away the key pieces of that material in that curriculum, but the actual grades and stuff, just shake it off, just let it go. And this is your time to really build off of your own identity and your new interpersonal relationships. And really, it's a new opportunity to see that if you are challenged in any capacity, doors are going to be open and you will be just fine. Even if it feels like panic. I didn't have a job lined up my 4th year until 2 weeks before graduation. Terrifying. It felt terrifying. But it all worked out just fine. So it gets better. Hang in there. And I'm sure whatever you're doing great.
Yeah, I don't know if you agree, but I've noticed an almost complete disconnect between academic performance at vet school and career. I don't know, I just want to say success. It's a loaded word, but happy, fulfilled veterinary careers. Zero. Well, not zero. Let's say the really smart kids in my class or other people I know, they will often do really well if they go down an academic route, so becoming a lecturer or a teacher or something like that. But beyond that, nothing. Like I know so many fantastic specialists who were at vet school with me who scraped by or failed a year and then scraped by and then you go, oh, I don't know what kind of a vet you're going to be. And they're fantastic vets because they focus, because once it's real life and not textbook anymore, things click into place and you find your passion and you find your path.
And if you're a clinician listening to this, keep that in mind, because there are things that stick with your students that you're working with that you might think are casual and it hits them low. Like I was told that I should pick a different career. That really, really hit me low. And, it's, well, that test wasn't that hard. You should have done better. It's like things that seem common sense to us. Just either take a moment to choose kindness or have a dialogue to maybe peel it out on what's going on with them or something like that. But some things that we say might seem just casual to us, but they can hit low even if they're unintentionally doing so.
Yeah, very good point. Can I just say, I love that you were the kid who watched Animal Cops and wanted to be that and became that. There's so few people who think they know what they want to do, even vet specific, and actually end up doing that, because your life goes this way and that way. But I love that you took it and ran with it and you do it and looks like you're loving it.
Thank you very much.
Liz, thank you so much for your time. That was insightful and delightful, surprisingly, considering the heaviness of the topic. I really enjoyed that, and I think it will hopefully let some light bulbs go off for a lot of people listening to this. And then also thank you for doing what you do. It is such, as I said, at the beginning, I was like, why do you want to do vet forensics? I thought it might be really boring, but it's really critical work. It is speaking for those who can't speak for themselves and defending them. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I absolutely loved our dialogue. And I'm glad that you came along for the ride of humor to drama to supporting others. We went on a roller coaster, so I hope everybody listening takes some self-care after this.
You know that it's going to be a wild ride when you start with chicken and sexual molestation.
There's so many more stories.
Before you disappear, I wanted to tell you about our new weekly newsletter. I speak to so many interesting people and learn so many new things while making the podcast. So I thought I'd create a little summary each week of the stuff that stood out for me. We call it the Vet Vault 321, and it consists of, firstly, 3 clinical pearls. These are 3 things that I've taken away from the clinical podcast episodes. My light bulb moments, the penny dropping, any new facts, and the stuff that we need to know to make all the other pieces fit. Then, 2 other things. These could be quotes, links, movies, books, a podcast highlight, anything that I've come across outside of clinical vetting that I think you might find interesting. And then 1 thing to think about. I'll share something that I'm pondering, usually based on something that I've read or heard, but sometimes it'll be just my own musings or rants. The goal of this format is that you can spend just 2 to 3 minutes on the clinical stuff and move right along if that's all that you're after. But if you're looking for content that is more nourishing than cat videos or doom scrolling, then our 2 other things should send you in the right direction. And then something extra for when you feel like a slightly longer read. If you'd like to